Hey everyone, a really warm welcome back, and a warm welcome especially to all the Feeling owners who have been commenting recently, both those who have already got their vans and those who are considering getting one. You know, these things are very rare in the UK, so it's a huge honour for me to have your company, and it's really great to have you here. So thanks so much for joining in, and thanks so much for all the lovely comments that you've been leaving. And that's not just in the UK, so herzlich willkommen to everybody who's tuning in from Germany. It's wonderful to have our German friends looking in on the channel as well. So, very warm welcome everyone. So today I'm in the caravan trying to unhibernate it. It's having its service next week, and that's roughly in the right place for its annual service, so that's a great thing to happen. But as I was doing that, I thought it might be a really good idea actually to show you one of the mods that we did a year ago, two or so years ago I think, and that's to put these things in. So these little pods, I guess, at the end here are retrofitted. So we built these, and these are 12 volts and USB points, and we've got one on each side of the front shelf here because we don't have a traditional front chest. And for me that's perfect in a caravan this small. You know, we can't cope with a front chest at the front here. We just have this little table, which I'll pop a card up in the top actually, because this is one we built ourselves, because the table that came with the caravan was absolutely massive. So, you know, wonderful to get 5 people around eating, but a bit of a pain in the daytime in terms of moving around and so on. So we built this much smaller one. But we have no sockets at the front here. And in fact, when the van itself was brand new, we had nothing at the front here. So, you know, we have devices, the boys have devices, all these things need charging. And this is a 2016 built caravan, although we didn't buy it until 2017, early 2017. And at that point, and I think it still may be the case, that you can't get USBs in these things, so it was a question of fitting a couple of those ourselves. It wasn't a particularly complicated process, but I thought it might be useful to make a little video to guide you through what we did. So let me give you a close-up of the pods themselves, and then I'll talk you through how we fitted them. As I said, 12 volts on one side, USB on the other, so there's 2 slots in there in the usual way. A 1 amp and a 2.1, nice little waterproof cover over the top. Run out of hands. Something's warped in the winter. There, I just couldn't line it up properly. Alright, so when that's down it covers up that light, but you know, most of the time you just leave the thing hanging open. And we were conscious that we didn't want this super bright blue light at night, because the boys' bed is just at the top there. I haven't finished sorting that out yet, but this will glow rather brightly. So we also put in on the back a switch that turns the whole thing off, and that also means when we're running on batteries, so when we're off grid, then we can make sure we're not losing any power, because USBs of course are at 5 volts and the feed coming in from the leisure batteries at 12 volts. So they do have a little transformer inside them to step that down from 12 volts to 5 volts, and transformers do use a little bit of energy to keep them running even if they're not doing anything. Hence the switch on the back to be able to cut the connection so that we're not wasting power doing nothing. Alright, so this socket will take up to 120 watts at 12 volts, so that's a fair old charge. I mean, that's 10 amps that could go through there. Now, I didn't design this as a super instructional video. You know, this is just a what we've done type video in case you want to take some inspiration from that. But of course, do your research properly. And there's a couple of things I should say. Be very, very careful what you're screwing into and how you're actually holding your boxes down. So for example, for these pods that we've put in on top of this shelf, of course this shelf is directly above the gas locker, so it's separating the habitation area, the living area, from the gas locker itself. And so we had to be very, very careful about what choice of screws we were using and how we were assembling stuff. So the box itself is secured down with that super sticky automotive grade It's double-sided tape, but it's some serious stuff. It's the same stuff that I used for the upstairs boxes itself. So they're mainly secured down with that super strong automotive double-sided tape, and then we just used a couple of really short screws from mechanical fixing. But I think that was overkill. But you know, do not go screwing right the way through a shelf so that you're actually opening up a gas path between the locker and the habitation area. Also, you know, this is 12-volt electric, so it's pretty simple stuff. You know, there's a positive and there's a negative, but do your research and make sure you fully understand everything first, or just get an electrician to sort it for you if that's not something you're interested in learning about, because you do have to make sure you're buying the correct grade of cable, so you make sure that you know how much power and how much current you might be carrying in the end, and get the cable thickness matched to that, and of course make sure you're fusing things correctly. So just in terms of what we did, our 12-volt electrics are a little bit different to normal, I guess, because we've got this electro block unit and everything runs through that. And luckily we had spare space there, so we could use a couple of the slots that were already part of that system. We're now full, so we can't add anything else into there. And they, fortunately, were the correct rated circuits, and they had the correct size fuses in. So it was just a matter of putting blade connectors onto the end of our cabling and slotting into there. You might need to run direct to your battery, in which case, you know, make sure all your positive leads are fused and so on, and that your fusing and your cables are correctly matched to the load it's going to carry. So for example here, you know, our maximum load is 120 watts on that 12-volt socket, and then if we add up the possible draw from that 1 amp and 2.1 amp USB socket, but remember that's at 5 volts, so you multiply current by voltage and then you get power in watts. So if we times 3.1 by 5, we get 15.5 watts, and we add that to our potential 120 from the other side of the socket itself. Then we can see for each pod the potential draw is 135.5 watts, which if we then divide that back through by 12 volts, because that's what the supply is at, then we get 11.3 amps as a maximum. So I had to make sure I chose cabling that was rated for plenty over that, and I think the choices I had were 8.75 amps, which is that lighting cable I showed you earlier, and then the next one up for medium duty use is 27.5 amps cable, or it was at the supplier I used. So of course I went for 27.5 on the power sockets and used the 8.75 stuff for the lighting circuits, which we put in separately upstairs. And the best practice here is to make sure we're using the correctly rated stuff, so that we're not carrying around an excess of copper, because it's just heavy and it weighs more, so there's no point carrying much more than you need. But you do need to have plenty of capacity if you're going to be pulling your maximum current load through there, because of course if you're carrying a lot of current through a thin cable, then, as we've all seen the horror stories from curled up cables in the winter on campsites, you know, these things do heat up if they're carrying a lot of load, and we don't want to be causing any fires. And also, the point of the fuse is there to protect the system itself, so it needs to be the weakest point in the whole system, and then it protects the cabling and so on. And so for this particular circuit, knowing I was going to be drawing a maximum of 11.3 amps. Now, to be fair, I'm never going to have anything plugged into everything running at that sort of wattage, but anyway, that's what I did my calculations based on. So 11.3 amps was the maximum I'd be drawing. So 15 amps was just enough over the maximum draw that I could be taking from the circuit, to be sure that everything could be protected, but also that I wasn't going to get any nuisance blowouts, because the fuse was too close to the load that might be going through there. But I knew that it was plenty low enough under the cable rating that the cabling and the system would be well protected. And then obviously in terms of running cables, you know, try and keep cables as short as possible, not just from a weight point of view, but also because in big cable runs then you tend to get voltage drops. So you might be 12 volts at one end, but the other end of your cable will end up at, I don't know, 11.5 or something, and that gets worse at lower voltages as well. So it can be an issue if you've got stuff running around at 12 volts. So obviously keep everything as short as possible. And of course, that's how come power distribution around the country is done at 400,000 volts, and then it's only stepped down to 230 volts locally. But that is a whole another channel on science rather than what I'm trying to do today. So anyway, take home message being keep your cable runs as short as you possibly can. So these are self-built pods. These are very thin. You see we made a bit of a mess there in terms of wood fillering. But this is very thin, what's that, 6mm birch ply, so nice and strong. And then I've used my favourite black dye that I used on the table to dye them, and then it's had some external grade matte varnish applied over the top, so a few layers of that to keep it nice and clean. Now you can buy these as plastic things ready to take these CBE sockets, which I'll show you in a second, but they were a bit big, so a bit wide, a bit tall, and we wanted something as absolutely slimline, as small as possible, so it didn't look out of place. And we also wanted to get a nice flat line on the back here, so you can see we've designed that to go nice and flat right up to the trunking. So in fact the cable comes out through the back and goes into this trunking. That's stuck down. So this trunking here is part of the standard equipment, so this is how. Pushing in a bit there, might put some tape over that just to keep it tidy, keep the dust out. So that's how Hymer deal with all their cabling, so all their cabling is nice and neatly put away. So that is already hiding the cabling for the thermostat there, for the Truma Combi E. I think the road lights might come through there as well. Let's see if we can pop the front off and have a look. Yep, so our cable's in there already. So I think that's one for the road light, one for the thermostat, and one for this binnacle pod. What would I call it? Pod, maybe power pod. So that's all in there. That keeps it all nice and tidy. Out the way of the seating, that just pops back on. And then this comes down. I did dust this when I put the caravan away a few months ago. So that comes down, pops through the back there. Now we need to, I haven't tacked the wires up properly yet, but can you see the wires just coming through under there? Yeah, so the black ones, these are the two from our pods, so one from the left, one from the right. That's an extra 240 which we've put in, which I'll talk about in another video. That just comes through the back here. And then this is perhaps a system that's a little bit different from most caravans. So this is our 12 volt management system. So this is a Shout, a CSV 409 I think it is, or it might be a 403. No, it's a 409A, just read the top. So this does all the battery charging, all the 12 volt management. It's incredibly clever. It's got all these things going on here. So luckily we had a couple of spare points in terms of power supply that were fused at the correct level, so it's 15 amp fuses in here. So that was all very nice, so we could just, you see, I don't want to shift it too much. We could just get our cables in and blade connectors on the end and slot it in, all very simple. And then at this end, so there's the blue cable, that's the flexi cable that comes through into the extra 240 point that we put there. And as I said, I'll explain that in another video. And then the black cable that goes through to the other side, so it goes through under this piece at the front, out through the other seating box, and then just up through the trunking on that side and in the back again. Exactly the same switch and 12 volts and USB on the front. Excuse the damp crystals. Those of you that follow me on Twitter know I did a lot of experiments this winter, so I've actually got some definitive data on whether these things make a difference or not. You can see they're wet, so it's quite clear that they get wet through the winter, but the question was, do they actually make the inside of the caravan any drier? Or are they just taking moisture from the outside at the same rate as they're getting damp, and therefore making no difference at all to the inside? Well, I have the data, unfortunately, because I was helping at school with COVID testing and the boys were homeschooling, then I haven't turned that into a video yet. But I will get around to doing that probably later in the year now, because it's a bit pointless putting out a video on damping caravans in the middle of the summer. In today's video I'm not going to talk you through how we made the boxes themselves, because there's already a video on the channel back in the archive from, I think it's December 2019. You're seeing some of the footage now from that particular video, so I'll put a card and link above and you can go and check out how to make the boxes if you'd like to know. So those ones up there are surface mount, and likewise so are these. Anyway, the mounting boxes themselves look like this, and as you can see we've just used a hole saw to cut entry points for the back boxes and the cables and so on. So let me just show you what those CBE things look like. Alright, so here's my box of electrical tricks. So this is the lighting wire, not the power cable we used, but you can see it's 2-core. So it's red and black 2-core, and it's stranded because this stuff has to be flexible and has to hold up to the vibration that you get in the vehicle as it's moving along, and of course extremes of heat and cold that you get in a caravan or a motorhome compared to a domestic situation where you can have single solid core copper wire. And then this is what the CBE stuff looks like. So behind each of these power connections is a back box that looks a bit like this. So cable comes in here, gets held in the securing point nice and firmly, and that protects it. That then clips in, you've got your surface of your, I don't know, your wood or something, which you cut a hole in the middle, so that fits through there. And then on the front you get a front plate like this that sits directly in front with, I don't know, your 12-volt point or whatever in there. This screws to the surface, so then you're securing all the things through. And then with these ones you also get an outer frame, which I don't have any spares of, and then you clip your, so you can see where the outer frame's missing, just around this middle section there. And then you have this decorative frame. So in this caravan it was fitted with this square line CBE, and I've managed to get exactly the same stuff, so the things that we fitted look exactly as if they were straight out of the factory, which is great. So this is square line chrome CBE. This one's actually broken. This was one from the bathroom that we had replaced. Just kept it in case we have an emergency. So let me show you where the controller is for the Truma, and then you can see the outline frames. Right, so here's an original setup. A little bit dusty. I can't believe how dirty it is in here, considering I cleaned it 3 months ago from top to bottom. So you can see this is a triple frame. You can choose singles, doubles or triples. And then here we've just got the Truma Combi controller. So can you see there's the outside frame, there's the fitting itself that fits in, so you can choose any combination, and there's the decorative panel. So there's a bit more on the outside frame, just sits on the surface there. And I like these square line ones because not only do they look very modern because they're very square, but they're actually very slim line, so they don't stick out too far, which is great. You know, if you're in a small space, everything needs to be appropriately sized so it looks good. Alright, so there's that one in there, and there's the binnacles over there. Binnacles, pods, I don't know what to call them. And we also fitted, here's my electrical box, a little battery tester down here. So this was very simple, just a hole in the back, which I can probably show you, can't I? So this one didn't need to have a back box, but then it's just got 2 little cables that come out the back, so that's the fitting itself, that's the back of that central bit. We've tacked our wires down so they're all nice and tidy, and then they just feed in. So for us, we could feed it straight off of here because we had battery connection points, but you might run yours off of your terminals, your battery itself. We've got a lot of stuff coming off of there already. But yeah, super simple. Excuse the dust. So central bit, outer frame, mounting point, and then I can see that my battery is absolutely fine. Now of course this works quite well for lead acid. If you've got a lithium battery, they tend to keep a very flat profile until they're very, very empty, so that sort of indicator wouldn't be so helpful. But we've got AGM, so that works fine for us. So that was an added extra as well. Very simple. Drill a hole, right sort of size, get it nicely set up, cables carefully in, and you can tell what your battery's up to, which is great, because if you're off grid you have no idea. With this one, there's no other meters or indicators in our van. We don't have a big control panel. Now the downside of this sort of system is price. This is absolutely phenomenally expensive. I mean, this stuff is 10 times or 20 times more than you'd pay for a domestic socket. So let's just have a little look at the supplier I bought this stuff from. You can get this from many other suppliers, just happen to be featuring this one because it's the place I got it from. And as you can see, you know, this just a single USB socket. They call it double because it's got 2 USB points in, but it's in a single setting. The square one, you know, 15 quid for a socket. If we look at 240 sockets, then singles 13.95, or we can go up to doubles or triples, and then the doubles are even more here, and then the triples, you know, 27.50 for 3 sockets. And I should actually point out quickly that the back box I showed earlier, you only actually need that back box for the 240 volts, so that holds the cable nice and still. So this is a 240 volt socket. As you can see, you've got the 5 components there. So you've got the round back box that the cable goes into, and it sits behind your plywood or whatever, and then you've got the chunkier front frame which screws into the front face of the plywood, and the socket itself which screws through the socket through that back frame into the plywood, and then the back box which sits on the back. And then in this case, the square case, you've got the inner black frame and then you've got the outer silver frame. So that's what we've got fitted for our mains. And then for the USB sockets and the 12 volt sockets, you get all the front bits, but you don't need that cylindrical back box to keep everything protected. And of course the 12 volt socket is like a cylinder itself, so it already sticks back behind the front face of what you're installing. So you've got to make sure you've got enough room and clearance to get that socket in, which is why we've got these things mounted in boxes. And there's lots and lots of different variations, so switches and sockets and step sockets and TV hookup points and various combinations. It used to be you had to pick these bits out individually, but now I guess this particular supplier has understood that it's actually quite difficult if you're buying this for the first time and you're unfamiliar with the system to pick out exactly the bits you need, because it can be a little bit complicated. So obviously it's a bit confusing for anybody new to know, you know, which bits of frame they need. So as a result, they've put all sorts of different combinations on the website. But I mean, look at this, 31 quid for each side for all the bits that we've got assembled. So just a 12 volt hookup and a USB hookup. So it is blooming expensive compared to the sort of stuff you can pick up for domestic setups that you can pick up in Screwfix and so on. But you know, on the plus side, it's a small space, and therefore it's really important that everything is consistent so it doesn't look claustrophobic and crowded and disorganized. When you get these CVE connectors, you get I don't have any spare ones. So you get these little end pieces that you need to put on. So they sit as so there's a blade on the back of the connector if it's a 12 volt connection, for example, and that just slips over the top, so that fits nice and neatly. So I've popped a couple of links in the description below for this sort of stuff. There's a few bits and pieces of this that are available through Amazon if you don't want to go direct to the suppliers, and as always they're affiliate links, so if when you're ready to buy you want to support the channel at the same time, please do come back to the video and click on the link, because I think we only get the commission if you check out within 24 hours of having clicked the link. And as always, of course, that costs you exactly the same, you pay exactly the same price, but by using the links you get Amazon to give a little bit of a donation in terms of commission to the channel. So it's all gratefully received, and everything goes back into running the channel itself and helping to make more videos and more bits of advice and so on. So massively gratefully received, thanks. Alright, well I think that's all there is to say. As I said, it was much more of a here's what we did rather than an instructional video, but hopefully having a look round was interesting and maybe gives you some ideas if you're thinking about doing something similar. So thanks so much for your company, and from me I guess is bye for now. See ya.